She threw my laptop into the pool while 40 people watched. That is where this story begins. Not with the arguments that came before it, not with the years of quiet. Right there, on a 4th of July afternoon in Mitchellville, Maryland, standing on her parents' patio in the heat, watching my laptop sink to the bottom of that pool in slow motion, the screen flickering blue once before it went dark. What no one at that cookout could have known, what my wife did not know, what her father did not know as he stood there laughing, was that 4 hours earlier, at 10:47 that same morning, a wire transfer had cleared in an amount I'm still not entirely comfortable saying out loud. $38.2 billion. The laptop at the bottom of that pool contained nothing I needed. The deal was already done. I had driven straight from a law office in downtown DC to my in-laws' house in my good shirt, planning to tell my wife that evening, just the two of us, just dinner, that everything was about to change. Instead, I watched her father laugh. Before you assume you know where this story is going, before you decide this is about money or humiliation or a man who got the last word, stay with me. Because what happened that 4th of July was not about what I had built. It was about what I had never let anyone see. And I have to be honest with you, some of that was their fault. But some of it was mine. The kind of suburb that announced arrival without announcing wealth, that is the only way I know to describe Mitchellville. The houses sit back from the street on quarter-acre lots, and every lawn is maintained with the specific attention of people who remember when a lawn like that meant something. Harold and Patricia Okafor had lived on Dunmore Court for 22 years. Long enough to know every neighbour by first name. Long enough that when they threw a cookout, people came dressed. There were maybe 40 people in that backyard by 2 o'clock. Patricia's sister Renee had driven up from Richmond with her husband and 3 kids. Harold's old colleague Curtis was there, retired GSA, always in a short-sleeve button-down regardless of the heat, always with something to say about government contracts and the men who landed them. Vanessa's brother Dwayne and his wife Cherise were stationed near the grill, where Harold held court with a pair of tongs he did not actually need. The grandchildren ran between the adults' legs. Someone had a Bluetooth speaker going. Old-school, quiet storm, the kind of playlist Harold approved of. The smell of charcoal and seasoned meat hung over the whole yard. I was at the picnic table near the back fence. I had been at that table for most of the afternoon, which I understood was a problem. I had my laptop open and my phone face up beside it, and I knew how that looked. I knew it before Vanessa's eyes found me from across the patio the first time, and the second time, and the third. There is a specific expression a woman makes when she has already decided not to say something, and has decided again, and is running out of decisions. I had seen it before. I recognized it the way you recognize weather. What I could not explain to anyone at that table, what I was not yet allowed to explain, was that I was watching a number, a single figure in a secure client portal that my attorney, a man named Gerald Watkins on the 14th floor of a building on K Street, had told me to monitor until confirmation posted. The acquisition had been 8 months in the making, 67 weeks of NDAs, shell entity structuring, federal review, and silence. And that morning, at 10:47, the number had appeared. I had driven to Mitchellville directly from Gerald's office. I had shaken his hand, walked to my car in the parking garage on L Street, sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes, and then driven 40 minutes to my in-laws' 4th of July cookout, because that was the plan. That had always been the plan. Tell Vanessa tonight, just dinner, just the two of us. Let the day be what it was supposed to be. But that is not how the day went. By 3 o'clock, the heat had settled into something serious. I remember that specifically. The way the air had stopped moving entirely. Patricia had brought out a tray of deviled eggs and paused, at the edge of the patio to say something to Renee, and whatever she said made Renee glance in my direction for just a moment before looking away. Dwayne had stopped looking at me altogether sometime around noon, which with Dwayne meant something. I felt Vanessa before I saw her. She came around the side of the table without hurrying, the way you move when you have made up your mind about something and want to appear calm about it. She was wearing a yellow sundress she had bought in May, and her hair was pinned up because of the heat. She looked like herself. She looked like the woman I had married in a garden ceremony in Largo in 2013, which made what happened next harder to hold in the body than I expected. She picked up my laptop with both hands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't announce what she was doing. She walked 6 steps to the edge of the pool and dropped it in flat, the way you'd set something down on a table. It hit the water with a sound I still haven't found the right word for. Not a splash, something heavier than that. The screen flickered once, blue-white, and then the water closed over it. She said, "Maybe now you'll be present." And Harold laughed. Not a quiet laugh. Not the kind a man tries to swallow. He laughed the way people laugh when something finally confirms what they already believed. I sat there for a moment. I counted something. I don't know what. Maybe just the seconds, maybe just the distance between where I was and the gate. I picked up my phone. I picked up my keys. I stood. I did not say goodbye. I did not say anything. I walked through the gate on the side of the house, and I got in my car, and I drove. The cookout was still going when I pulled out of Dunmore Court. I could hear the music for half a block. I want you to stay with me here, because this is where the story actually begins. Not in that backyard, but in everything that came before it. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that now, and drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching this from, because what I'm about to tell you took 7 years to build, and I'm going to take my time telling it. To understand what I built, you have to understand what I saw. In 2017, I was a senior systems analyst for the state of Maryland. Contract work, which meant I was good enough to need, but not important enough to keep. I spent my days moving between county offices in Prince George's, Montgomery, and Anne Arundel, troubleshooting data systems that had been built in 3 different decades by 3 different vendors who had never spoken to one another. A permitting record created in Upper Marlborough couldn't be read by an inspection system in Rockville. Emergency dispatch in Annapolis was running on a server that still used a programming language most universities had stopped teaching in 2004. Every county was an island, every system spoke a different language, and nobody in any of those offices thought this was unusual because they had never seen anything different. I thought about the problem constantly, on the drive home, in the shower, at the dinner table, which I understood even then was beginning to cost me something. The idea for Civic Core was not a flash of inspiration, it was an accumulation, with the same word I would use to describe what happened to my marriage, though for very different reasons. I started sketching the architecture in a notebook I kept in my work bag in late 2016. A middleware platform that could sit between any 2 municipal systems, regardless of age or vendor, and allow them to exchange data cleanly. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing you could explain at a dinner party in a way that made anyone's eyes stay with you, but essential in the way that load-bearing walls are essential, invisible until something collapses. I incorporated quietly in January 2017. The holding company was called Meridian Civic Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware, and I was listed nowhere in its public documents. That was Gerald Watkins's advice from the beginning, and I took it without fully understanding how significant that choice would become. Gerald had been doing municipal technology law for 19 years. He told me plainly if a county procurement officer sees an individual's name attached to a vendor, they get nervous. If they see a properly structured LLC with clean financials and no public controversies, they sign. We were building for trust, he said, not recognition. I told him that was fine with me. It was fine with me. That is the part one have had to sit with. By the end of 2018, Meridian had signed service agreements with Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and the city of Annapolis. Combined contract value, $4.3 million over 3 years. I hired 2 contractors to help with deployment and kept everything else myself. I was still doing state contract work during the day. I was building Civicor from 7 in the evening until past midnight 6 nights a week in the 2nd bedroom of the house in Bowie that Vanessa and I had bought the year before. She called it the office. She called it that without any particular warmth. Now I need to tell you about Harold Okafor, because you cannot understand what that cookout felt like without understanding where Harold had spent the last 30 years of his life. Harold had been a senior contracting officer at the General Services Administration for 28 years before he retired in 2015. He had managed federal procurement portfolios that ran into the hundreds of millions annually. He had an office on the 5th floor of a building on F Street with a view that faced the Capitol Dome on clear days. He understood government. He understood contracts. He understood the difference, as he once told me over Sunday dinner, in a voice just loud enough to carry, between men who built things that lasted and men who chased things that didn't. He said it without looking at me. He didn't need to look at me. Harold's contempt was never loud. That was what made it so effective. It lived in the pauses. The moment after I answered a question about work, where he would nod once and then turn to ask Dwayne about something else. It lived in the way he described me to his colleagues when they came around. Vanessa's husband works in tech. Never the specifics, never a title, just the category offered like a placeholder. And Vanessa, over time, began to use the same pause. By 2022, Civicor was licensed in 23 states. By early 2023, 41. The platform had quietly become the connective tissue between more than 400 municipal systems across the country. I had never given a conference talk. I had never taken a meeting with a journalist. Meridian's revenue that year was $212 million, and my name appeared nowhere in any document a search engine could find. That year, a federal defense contractor called Veritas Infrastructure Group began making quiet inquiries through Gerald's office. They were building a national emergency response data layer and needed a backbone. They had found Civicor the way serious institutions find serious things, not through publicity, but through the testimony of people who had used it and needed to tell someone. The negotiation took 14 months. On the morning of July 4th, I sat across from Gerald Watkins at a conference table on the 14th floor of his building on K Street. There were 4 other attorneys in the room. The documents were already signed. We were waiting for the wire confirmation to post to the Meridian escrow account. It arrived at 10:47 a.m. Gerald slid a single sheet of paper across the table with the final confirmed figure printed at the bottom. $38.2 billion. I shook Gerald's hand. I shook the hands of the 4 attorneys, whose names I have since forgotten. I took the elevator to the parking garage. I sat in my car for 4 minutes. Then I drove to Mitchellville, because that was the plan. Because Vanessa was at her parents' cookout, and I was going to get through the afternoon and take her to dinner and tell her everything, all of it, finally. I had rehearsed the conversation 100 times. I never got to say a word of it. Here is what I want you to understand about the years between 2019 and that 4th of July afternoon. The damage was not done in any single moment. It was done the way water damages a foundation. Slowly, invisibly, and in a place where no one thought to look until the wall began to lean. The house on Melwood Avenue in Bowie was Vanessa's idea, and I had been glad to let it be. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a deck she never used, because I was always promising to fix the railing and never did. We moved in during the spring of 2019, and for about 4 months, something close to ordinary happiness lived there with us. She planted things along the fence. I built a workstation in the second bedroom and told her it was temporary. It was not temporary. By the end of that first year, the workstation had a second monitor. I missed her birthday dinner in March of 2020, not the dinner itself, but the hour leading up to it, which is when she needed help with her earring clasp and her shoes from the closet shelf, and the 10 minutes of just standing together in the bathroom mirror that couples do before they go out, the ritual that says, "We are a unit tonight." I was on a call with a county procurement officer in Hennepin County, Minnesota, and I let it run long. I met her at the restaurant. She had already ordered the bread. She smiled when I sat down, and that smile was the kind that cost something to produce. I told myself I would make it up to her. I told myself that 100 times across 100 small occasions, and the making up never quite arrived because there was always another call, another county, another state legislature asking Gerald's office for a briefing on interoperability compliance. The work had its own gravity. Once you understand that, you understand me a little better. But understanding is not the same as being excused. There is a church on Old Branch Avenue in Clinton, a New Covenant Baptist, where Harold and Patricia had worshipped for 30 years. The fish fry there every third Friday was a community institution. Vanessa grew up sitting in the fourth pew from the left-center section, and when we were first married, she would go back for homecoming and the anniversary services, and the occasional Sunday when she missed the particular way the choir at New Covenant built a song from nothing into something that moved through the whole room. I went with her when I could. When I could became when it was convenient. When it was convenient became rarely. In October of 2021, I went with her for the church's centennial celebration. There was a reception afterward in the fellowship hall, folding tables covered with those plastic tablecloths, sheet cake, sweet tea in a dispenser that dripped. Patricia found us near the door and steered us toward a cluster of women she knew from the missions board. She introduced Vanessa with her full name and her job title. Vanessa Whitfield. She's the Director of Community Outreach at Prince George's County Health Department. And then she turned to me and said, "And this is her husband? He does computers." Not his name. Not a title. Just the category. I watched Vanessa's face in the half-second that followed. Something moved across it. Not enough for anyone else to see. But I had been reading her face for 8 years by then. She did not correct her mother. She smiled at the women and said something pleasant, and moved the conversation forward, and I stood beside her, and understood, with the particular clarity that comes in small cold moments, that we had arrived somewhere together without discussing the route. I want to stop here for a moment, because I think you need to hear something clearly. I am not telling you this story to place the blame on Vanessa. What I am telling you is that two people can fail each other simultaneously in different directions with equally good intentions and still end up standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable distance. That is not a tragedy with a villain. That is just a marriage that ran out of the one thing it needed most, which was the willingness to be honest in the dark. The near discovery happened in the fall of 2023. A trade publication called Government Technology Quarterly ran a 4-paragraph item on a panel discussion about municipal data infrastructure, and someone on the panel mentioned Civic Core by name, not Meridian, not any of the holding entities, just the platform itself, and described it as the most widely adopted interoperability solution in the country's history. Vanessa happened to walk into the office while I had the article open on my screen. She stopped. She read the headline. She said, "Is that your thing?" I said, "It's related to something I've been working on. There's a confidentiality agreement. I can't get into it right now." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "You can't get into it," she said. "Not yet." She nodded once, slowly, in the way people nod when they have stopped believing the sentence, but have also stopped having the energy to argue with it. Then she went back down the hall. I heard the television come on in the bedroom. The volume was lower than usual, which was somehow worse than if she had turned it up. That was the moment, not the cookout, not the pool. That hallway, that nod, that lowered volume. That was when Vanessa Okafor Whitfield decided that she was done waiting for a husband who would not let her in. Everything after that was just the formality of it becoming visible. Sometime in the early months of 2024, she picked up her phone and typed a message to her mother. She got as far as 4 words. "I think we're done." And then she held it there, her thumb over the send button, and did not press it. She deleted the draft. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark beside a man who was 3 feet away and completely unreachable. She did not send that message, but she had already made the decision that it contained. That is what was already true before anyone walked near that pool. My mother has lived in the same house on Marlborough Pike since 1987. Tan brick, black shutters, a porch with 2 chairs and a small table between them, where she keeps a citronella candle from May through September. The neighborhood has changed around her 3 times over. Different families, different languages spoken from different porches. And she has outlasted every version of it with the same particular stillness that I have been trying to learn from her my entire adult life. I pulled into her driveway at 4:47 in the afternoon. I know the time because I looked at my phone when I parked, not for any reason, just the automatic gesture of a man who has spent a decade measuring his life in increments. She was in the front yard pulling spent marigolds from the border along the walkway. She looked up when I got out of the car. She looked at my face, and then she looked at my hands, and then she said nothing for a moment. "You hungry?" she said finally. "No." She nodded and went back to the marigolds. I sat down in one of the porch chairs and watched her work. Somewhere down the block, someone had fireworks going already, the low percussive kind that more felt than heard. The citronella candle was lit. A gospel station played through the screen door from the kitchen radio, barely audible the way she always kept it. After a while, she came up the steps and washed her hands at the outdoor spigot and dried them on her jeans and sat down in the other chair. We stayed like that for a long time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe more, and I was grateful for every second of it. Then she asked her one question: "Did you do something wrong today?" I thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way you can only do in a place where performance is not available to you. "Not today," I said. "But I did things wrong before today. Enough of them." She picked up her glass of sweet tea from the small table, took a sip, set it back down. "All right then," she said. She went inside after another few minutes, and the screen door closed behind her, and I was alone with the fireworks and the candle and the question she had left in the air. My father's name was Raymond Whitfield. He drove a service truck for Pepco, the electric utility, for 31 years. He died of a stroke in 2009, 2 weeks before I defended my master's thesis, which he had not known I was working on because I had not told him, because I was afraid it would not amount to anything, and I did not want to explain that to him. That is a regret I carry in a very specific place in my chest. It has its own texture. My father never talked much about his work. What he talked about, in the careful and infrequent way he talked about anything that mattered, was the nature of doing a job completely. He said once, I was maybe 16, we were in the driveway, and he was teaching me how to change a brake pad. He said, "The work you do when nobody's watching is the only work that belongs to you." Everything else is just a performance for somebody else's benefit. I had built Civic Core by that principle. Every line of code written after midnight in a house where everyone else was asleep. Every contract reviewed at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. Every decision made without applause or acknowledgement or anyone to confirm that I was on the right path. I had lived inside my father's instruction completely, and I had applied it to entirely the wrong thing. I had kept my silence with the work because the work required it, but I had kept my silence with Vanessa because silence had become my only available language, because I had spent so many years being misread that I had stopped offering myself to be read at all. I had confused discipline with withdrawal. I had confused patience with disappearance. And Vanessa, who had married a man she believed in, had spent 11 years watching that man become progressively less visible until the only version of him she could still reach was the one across a picnic table staring at a phone. She was not wrong about that. I want to be clear about that. What I decided, sitting on my mother's porch while Capitol Heights settled into its holiday evening, was not complicated. I would not call Vanessa. I would not call Harold. I would not issue any statement, make any announcement, or allow the money to become a weapon aimed at anyone who had underestimated me. The truth was already in motion. The Post story would publish in 9 days when the embargo lifted, and whatever it contained would arrive without my assistance. I would not help it along. I would not stand at the edge of the pool and pull the laptop out triumphantly. What I would do was stay here. Sleep in the room I grew up in, eat my mother's food, think about what kind of man I intended to be on the other side of all this, now that the thing I had built for 7 years in the dark was finally, irrevocably done. I went inside around 9 o'clock. My mother had made a plate and left it covered on the stove. Pot roast, green beans, a square of cornbread wrapped in a paper towel. I ate it, standing at the counter. I washed the dish. I went down the hall to the room that still had my high school track ribbons on the corkboard above the desk, lay down on a bed that was smaller than I remembered, and closed my eyes. I slept for 10 hours without moving. 9 days later, the Washington Post published its story. The 9 days were quiet in the way that the period before a storm is quiet. Not peaceful, just temporarily undisturbed. I stayed at my mother's house on Marlborough Pike. I slept longer than I had in years. I ate breakfast at her kitchen table, the gospel station on low, the morning light coming through the window over the sink at the particular angle it had always come through, unchanged since I was 11 years old. My mother did not ask me questions. She moved around me the way water moves around a stone, present, accommodating, unbothered. I called Gerald Watkins twice during those 9 days, brief calls confirming the embargo timeline. He told me the Post story was scheduled for the 13th. I thanked him. I hung up. I went back to the porch. I did not call Vanessa. I did not call Harold. I did not rehearse anything. The Washington Post published its story on the morning of July 13th at 6:47 a.m. The piece ran in the business section, both online and in print, under the headline, "The Invisible Backbone: How One Engineer Quietly Built the Infrastructure Connecting America's Cities." The reporter's name was Alicia Drummond. She had been working the story for 4 months through Gerald's office under embargo, and I had approved the final fact-check 10 days before the cookout, 2 days before I knew exactly when the acquisition would close. The photograph they used was from a 2022 site visit to a county data center in Raleigh, North Carolina. I am standing in front of a server rack in a blue button-down, sleeves rolled to the elbow, looking slightly off-camera. I remember that day. I remember the county IT director, a man named Terence Boykin, asking me, if I wanted a better photo taken, something more formal, and I told him that one was fine. That is the photograph Harold Okafor saw first. He saw it because his old colleague Curtis Bridgeforth, the man who had been at the cookout in the short-sleeve button-down, the retired GSA man who always had something to say about government contracts, called Harold at 7:22 a.m. I know the time because Vanessa told me later when she was finally able to speak about it in sequence. Curtis had seen the post alert on his phone at breakfast and had read the article through twice before he dialed. He knew Harold's son-in-law worked in tech. He had not, until that morning, understood what that meant. What Harold heard on that phone call I can only reconstruct from its aftermath. What I know is that he went to his desktop computer in the study, the same room where his GSA commendation certificates hung in matching frames, and he pulled up the Post article himself. He read it, then he read it again. The article described Civic Corps in terms that Harold, with his 30 years of federal contracting, would have understood precisely and completely. The platform's penetration across 41 state governments, its role in Veritas Infrastructure Group's National Emergency Response Initiative, the acquisition value confirmed by 2 independent sources at $38.2 billion. The article named me 12 times. I know what it costs a man of Harold's particular architecture to absorb that kind of information. He had built his entire understanding of me on a foundation that the article removed in 6 paragraphs. That is not a small thing. I want to be careful here because I am not interested in Harold's humiliation as a destination, but I think it is important to understand what happened inside that study on Dunmore Court, because it is the thing that set everything else in motion. Harold sat with that article for 41 minutes before he called Patricia into the room. I know this because Patricia mentioned it, eventually, to Vanessa. And Vanessa eventually mentioned it to me. 41 minutes. A man alone with the distance between what he believed and what was true. He called Vanessa at 8:31 in the morning. She was in her car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods on Route 450 in Bowie. She had driven there for coffee because the house felt too large and too quiet, and she had not been sleeping well. Her phone rang, and she saw her father's name and answered it. And what followed was a conversation I was not present for, and that she has never fully described to me. What she told me is that he said 3 things: that he had read something, that she needed to read it, that he was sorry. Harold Okafor told his daughter he was sorry. In 30 years of observing that man, I had not heard him use that word about anything. Vanessa pulled up the article in the parking lot. She sat in that car for a long time. I don't know exactly how long. Long enough that her coffee went cold, long enough that 2 different people walked past her window and she did not register them. She told me later that the thing she kept returning to was not the money, not the number, not the acquisition, not the name, printed 12 times in the Washington Post. What she kept returning to was the photograph, the server rack, the blue shirt, the way I was looking slightly off camera, like there was something just outside the frame that needed my attention. She said she had never seen that expression on my face in 11 years of marriage, which told her something she did not want to know about what 11 years of marriage had made me. She called me at 9:14 a.m. I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had not touched. I watched her name appear on the screen. I watched it for the full length of the ring. Then I watched it go to voicemail. Then I watched the screen tell me I had one new message. I picked up the phone. I set it face down on the table. I sat with the silence for a long time. That was enough for now. I read the voicemail transcript 3 days after she left it. I did not listen to her voice. I read the auto-generated text on my phone screen sitting at my mother's kitchen table On a Tuesday morning, with coffee going cold beside me, the same way I had sat with the untouched cup the morning the story ran. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face up this time, which was different, and I looked at the ceiling for a while. I am not going to tell you everything she said. Some of it belongs to her, and some of it belongs to the specific, private wreckage of a marriage that was ours and nobody else's. What I will tell you is that she did not ask me to come back. She did not apologize for the pool, not directly. What she did was speak about the photograph, the server rack, the blue shirt, and she said that looking at it, she had understood something she wished she had understood years earlier, which was that she had been watching me disappear and had decided the disappearing was indifference when it had been, in its way, devotion. She said she didn't know if that made things better or worse. She said she thought it probably made them both. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in 3 years. It arrived 9 days too late, which was also, in its way, my fault. I called Gerald that afternoon and asked him to recommend a family attorney. He gave me 2 names. I called the first one the next morning. 2 weeks after the Post story ran, I drove to the house on Melwood Avenue in Bowie. It was a Wednesday, around noon. Vanessa was at work. I had a key that I used for the last time. I walked through the rooms slowly, not looking for anything in particular, just looking. The deck rail I had never fixed. The second bedroom with the workstation, the 2 monitors, the cord management I had done very carefully, because I am meticulous about things that don't matter enough. I took my father's watch from the nightstand drawer. I took the notebook from 2016, the one where I had first sketched the Civic Core architecture in pencil, the spiral-bound mead with the green cover. I took a photograph of Vanessa and me from the hallway wall, the one from our trip to Savannah in 2017, before any of it had weight. I left everything else. I locked the door. I put the key through the mail slot. I drove back to Capitol Heights. That evening, I sat on the porch with my mother after dinner. The citronella candle was going. The street was calm. She asked me if I was all right, and I told her I thought I would be, which was the most accurate answer I had. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father used to say that a man who does the right thing for the wrong reason hasn't done the right thing yet." She paused. "You did the right thing. Make sure you know why." I have thought about that sentence every day since. I want to speak to you directly now because this is the part of the story that belongs to all of us, not just to me. The first thing I learned is that secrecy and privacy are not the same thing. Privacy protects something tender while it grows. Secrecy walls it off from the people who needed to be let in. I confused the two for a long time, and the confusion cost me the most important relationship in my life. If you are holding something back from someone who loves you, even for good reasons, even with good intentions, ask yourself whether you are protecting the work or avoiding the conversation. Those are different things. Only one of them is honest. The second thing is that being underestimated is not automatically someone else's fault. I let Harold's contempt become a wall I hid behind. Every dismissive comment was a reason not to try. I told myself I was being patient when I was actually being avoidant. Real patience stays in the room. It doesn't use misunderstanding as an excuse to disappear. The third thing is that the truth arrives on its own schedule, and your job is not to accelerate it or weaponize it. It is simply to be the same person when it arrives as you were when it was still hidden. That is the only thing the truth actually tests. Not whether you were right, but whether you remained yourself while you were waiting to be known. And the last thing is this: what the water kept was nothing essential. The laptop at the bottom of that pool contained no piece of me that mattered. The work was done. The deal was signed. Everything that had needed to exist already existed, somewhere it could not be reached by anyone's anger or anyone's grief. What you build in the dark when no one is watching, when there is no applause and no confirmation and nothing but the work itself to tell you that you are on the right path, that belongs to you in a way that nothing else ever will. I want to know what this story brought up for you. Leave a comment and tell me. And tell me where in the world you're watching from, because someone out there is sitting in a second bedroom right now at midnight building something nobody else can see yet. And I want them to know that the water doesn't keep what matters. On a Thursday morning in late September, I signed the last document the attorney needed, drove back to Capitol Heights, and walked into my mother's kitchen at 11:40 in the morning. She had the gospel station on low. There were biscuits in the oven. The light came through the window over the sink, at the angle it had always come through, and I sat down at the table and did not open my phone or my laptop or anything at all. I just sat there in the quiet and let it be quiet. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, it was exactly enough.